Hello and welcome to a special discussion on the Wire today on the security vulnerabilities and the privacy concerns in the wider Aadhaar ecosystem. While the centralized database that contains the personal details of over 1 billion Indians is largely solid, as UID is linked to every part of our society and every way we interact with the Indian government, an ecosystem has mushroomed around it. An ecosystem that contains a number of stakeholders, a number of institutions that, to put it mildly, is a bit of a leaky faucet. Today, in response to some of these concerns, the UIDAI has also rolled out 2 new security measures, and we will get around to discussing those. But our guest for today is Kiran Jonnalagadda, whose background provides gives them a unique perspective on Aadhaar as a technological system. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kiran, but in 2006-2007, you worked with a team in a company that helped computerize the Karnataka PDS system, which used biometrics.
Yes.
And your attempts were sort of used as a case study by the initial UIDAI team, which built Aadhaar. And today, of course, Kiran also runs his own company. It's called HasGeek, which coordinates and organizes events for the tech community. And of course, he's been an integral part of the Internet Freedom Foundation, which is an online movement that helps fight for digital civil liberties, Kiran. So over the last year, we've seen a number of very controversial incidents. In the early last year, over 200 government websites leaked, by one estimate, over 100 million Aadhaar numbers and the personal details of over 100 million people. And then towards the end of the year, we had a controversy with Airtel Payments Banks, which opened up 30 lakh bank accounts and routed 190 crores worth of LPG subsidy payments. Some of this without the consent of the users. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, the Tribune ran a very explosive story talking about how some parts of the Aadhaar database were being sold. Unauthorized.
All of the database was being
correct. Unauthorized access to the database was being sold for as little as 500 rupees. So now, Kiran, the headline question basically is that do we have a systemic problem here on our hands that there's no really one solution to it, or is it a series of isolated incidents, as the UIDAI and the government tries to portray it, that can be clamped down with better execution and implementation?
I don't think execution is going to fix this. I think the very design of Aadhaar is problematic. So let's start with where it began. The very notion of identity is essentially a means for an individual to prove who they are. And that's a fundamental idea, that I need to prove my identity to someone. And so I have a document which is given by an authority, and both of us believe in the authority, therefore we accept the document and say it's legitimate. But this is the fundamental use, that I need to prove my identity. Aadhaar inverts the model and says the state needs to ensure your identity. And to understand this, you need to look at where it comes from. It comes from the operations of the welfare state, the food and civil supplies departments across the country belonging to state governments, which provide subsidized rations to citizens and have to deal with the fact that we are no longer in the socialist economy that they were conceived in. We are now in a market economy. You can take the same produce, sell it on the market and get a much better rate. And so the state running its own operational mechanism, the supply chain from the production to the consumption, in competition with the market, obviously is going to leak all the way through the system. From the beginning to the end of the system, the supply chain is leaky. The consumers are very happy to abuse the system because this is alternative market which is sort of self-correcting.
Correct.
So what you've got here is a state-level bureaucrat looking at this leaky system and thinking that the solution is to plug the leaks, and assuming that if you can build a watertight system and build a moat around your entire operation to ensure nobody goes in or comes out without authorization, then you can stop this from breaking down. Some of us is going to look at this and say, you got this wrong. You need, if you think that your problem is you can't compete with the market, then don't compete with the market. Let the market run the shop. So that's one way to think about it, and that's partly what's come out in the direct benefit transfer line of thought about how to run this. Yeah. The other side being the PDS system. But Aadhaar was conceived for the PDS system, for running this supply chain. And the fundamental problem it attempts to chase is to say, can you ensure the identity of every person in your system, both within your supply chain and on the consumer level, and ensure that nobody shows up twice?
Sure.
Okay. So in this system, you're designing a surveillance mechanism and saying that you as the state want to ensure oversight over your own operations and the citizenry where they interact with you. It starts with this idea that it's the top level bureaucrat who's a good person and trying to fix the system, and everybody beneath them is a suspect. Okay? Now this is the imagination under which Aadhaar was created. It was never about the individual proving their identity. It was more about the state being able to see the individual. And so when you start with a design that looks at it like this, it changes when the designer of the system is the one at the bottom trying to talk to the state. You know, and part of what we're seeing now is, for many years it was sold as something that the technocrats came and built to solve the problem in society. And since you think technocrats are good people, you should trust it. Now that it's become a widespread thing, and all of us as individuals are subject to the mechanisms of this operation, of being surveilled because of the way it is designed, suddenly we're looking at this and saying, oh shit, what happened here? You know, what is this monster we've got on our lives? Oh. And the technocrats have sold a story from the very beginning saying it's all about plugging the leaks.
Right.
And that's all they're going to keep saying, that it's all about plugging the leaks, but it's not.
Sure.
You just built the surveillance state mechanism that you thought was for other people, and now it's on you as well.
Correct. Right. So, but now what this sort of situation that we've come to is that fine, it was designed for a certain thing, but now it's being used everywhere.
Yes.
And it's no longer in the hands of the agency UIDAI or even the central government per se. So state governments are in this, and any other government associated body that carries out a central government program. So we've been seeing privacy concerns arising out of that. Correct?
Yes.
So for last year, in Parliament, the government noted 200 websites.
Yes.
They thought that they would keep it in a secure place. It was easily available. You could Google search UIDI.xml and then you could find it. Yes. You find it. Who is at fault here, where 200 government websites publish the personal details, including the Aadhaar numbers?
Well, UIDAI, obviously.
UIDAI.
And the reason I blame them is that they did not educate their ecosystem on how to use this ID. UIDAI made design mistakes because they assumed people would not be smart and use appropriate technology. Now, this is a mistake I made when I was doing this stuff. That you think of yourself as a smart person who's designing a technologically sophisticated system that you know has obvious flaws that you can't get around because of your design limitations, but you assume other people are not smart enough to break it. And this assumption that other people are not smart enough never really holds up.
Right.
Because if there's value in it, it'll be broken.
Correct.
And so what you got here is that arrogance that's now showing in the way that's broken. Part of the arrogance is manifested in the fact that UIDAI made design mistakes in the design of the Aadhaar number itself. This is a mistake that has been made elsewhere. The US banking system has made this mistake. They continue to have this problem. The credit card system has made this mistake. The social security network system has made this mistake, which is that fundamentally the Aadhaar number is a private number. It is not a secret number. And in information technology...
For our viewers, could you just elaborate on the distinction between those
in information technology, if you need to identify yourself to some kind of electronic system, how do you prove to it that you are what you claim to be? Now, when you use a document, the physical document is your ID proof, as long as the other party does not suspect it to be forgery.
Sure.
When you sign a check, sometimes they say, please sign it in front of me so I can see that you're not carefully copying it from somewhere else. So that is their check. But when you talk to a purely electronic system, these kinds of checks are much harder to do, because the computer by definition has a very limited vision about what you're doing. You type in something, that's all it sees. It doesn't know where you got that from. So one of the approaches used in information technology, and this has been over the last 50 odd years, is to use the mechanism of a secret, where you say that there is a secret that only these two parties know. And so when the secret is exchanged, both parties feel assured that they've got the right person. A password is an example of a secret. One of the things necessary about a secret is that if the secret is not a secret, then it's no good.
Sure.
And so you must be able to throw away the secret and get a new one. And this is what you do with the password. If you feel your password is compromised, you change your password.
Sure.
The mistake that UIDAI made is they confused the Aadhaar number with being a secret. Okay, and designed the assumption that if a service provider has somebody's Aadhaar number, it must mean they've given them the service, because there's no other way to obtain the Aadhaar number.
Correct.
At the same time, you're supposed to give the Aadhaar number everywhere.
Yes.
So how do you give away your number everywhere and assume it will be a secret? They should have seen this coming way before. They made the mistake of thinking that people cannot be trusted with keeping secrets because they will not know how to value a secret effectively. Usernames and passwords are not a new problem. When UIDAI started doing this in 2009, they were known for like 40 odd years. So it's not like it was a radical new idea. They just decided that the entire history of the computer industry was not good enough for them, and that they were smart enough to design something better, and obviously they were not. Nobody is that smart.
Sure. But surely when state government websites display this kind of information, surely there's some fault on their part as well.
Well, their fault is that they did not follow the instructions. What we do not know is if they were given the instructions in the first place.
Correct.
We do know that the Aadhaar Act specifies that the display of your ID numbers is invalid, but the Aadhaar Act came much later. The leaks were already happening.
Correct.
So what were these various parties told about Aadhaar numbers before they were leaked? The other part being that under the RTI, they obviously, the various government departments are required to show that it went to the right beneficiary and not to the incorrect beneficiary. Now, how do you make a public display of a beneficiary's identity in a way that does not compromise their identity? One of the ways to do that is, can you display only part of the Aadhaar number and say that if you know your Aadhaar number and you see it in this public display and you feel that it's incorrect, you can go raise a complaint saying that, hey, that's not me.
Correct.
And it's not me because you don't have my number.
That's true.
But that requires a mask number, and they didn't have a masking standard.
Correct. But so today, Kiran, for instance, so I think they've recognized that, okay, I mean, for quite some time, I mean, over the last week, the UIDAI's primary defense has been that, Aadhaar number, even if it's public, it's okay. Even though the Aadhaar Act, as you pointed out, expressly prohibits that. So today they've come out with, the concept of a virtual ID, where it's one layer removed, where, you don't have to hand over your Aadhaar number to the LPG dealer or, to what they call local AUAs. We don't know who they're going to designate exactly, but the idea is that there's no way from the virtual ID to detect derive what your Aadhaar number is. So would that provide a sense of security?
It falls far too short of the problem. Two aspects of the problem. One is UID has lost control of their ecosystem. While they designed this ecosystem of CIDR plus ASA plus AUA or KSA plus KUA, if you use a paper Aadhaar card anywhere, none of those systems are in play.
Correct.
Any place that accepts a paper Aadhaar card, and I think we will find out about this in news that will come out in public over the next few days, as you discover the extent to which the paper Aadhaar card ecosystem works and works in places where it should not be used. Nothing is going to change over there. Your paper Aadhaar card remains a valid identity proof. You can continue submitting it in any place that accepts a paper Aadhaar card until the ecosystem stops accepting it, until that, to use a different term, until the ID card gets demonetized. It remains valid, and if it remains valid, anything you do on the other side doesn't really matter. It's not where the problem is. The second part is that the design of the virtual ID system. Now, if they had any sense, they would have looked at what others have done to solve this problem. What they've done is very similar to what's called a directional ID that is used in the OpenID ecosystem. So OpenID once again uses this idea of unique identifiers. The OpenID ecosystem, going more than a decade back, ran into the same problem, that if you use a universal token across databases will be merged, profiles will be built. So one of the mechanisms used to deal with this problem, and Google was one of the most public implementations, and the OAuth ecosystem is built on this, is to use separate IDs for every service provider. So the identity provider gives a virtual ID to the service provider, which is what they store. It's a problem that has been tackled and solved. It is not good enough, and they identified the problem there, that it is still a private piece of information. It is not a secret. You need a secret in addition to the private piece of information. In OAuth, there is a user ID and the OAuth access token.
Correct.
This spec misses the access token. So it's just going to open up a new category of problems that you forgot about, because now you're passing on a virtual ID everywhere in your ecosystem instead of the original Aadhaar number.
Sure, right. So now we've sort of discussed one actor in this larger ecosystem, that is state governments, who UIDAI, it doesn't really have much control over. They don't have, of course they could try to rein them in after the fact, but there's really no institutional capacity within the organization to sort of oversee the way they handle Aadhaar in general. So, but secondly, so towards the end of last year, the Airtel Payment Bank controversy sort of erupted, where we saw that 30 lakh Airtel payment bank accounts were created, some of which were certainly created without user consent.
Yes.
The UIDAI has penalized Airtel for this, and 190 crores worth of LPG subsidy payments were routed to these bank accounts. And here also, again, whose fault is it?
UIDAI's.
UIDAI's.
Further confusion. So on the one hand, you have the difference between private and secret information. On the other hand, there are three distinct concepts here that are being confused. There's identification, there's authentication, and there is authorization. Let's say I give you an ID card. Now this ID card may be real, and you can look at it, look at your hologram, feel convinced that it's real. Maybe it's a passport, maybe it's a PAN, it doesn't matter. So what you've got here is proof that this is a valid ID card. It is not proof that it is my ID card.
Sure.
Okay, that requires something more. Now, typically on a photo ID card, you just look at the photograph and say, does it match? And you have really no hope beyond that. But when you go from the step of saying valid identification to valid authentication, there is something between this card and me that you should be able to verify. And in the Aadhaar ecosystem, that's biometrics.
Correct.
So you put your finger on a fingerprint scanner. The fingerprint scanner confirms that it's a stored biometric for this person, and so on. As it turns out, biometrics are not good enough in practice. It's failing extensively, but that's a technical failure.
Correct.
That's not a design failure, that's a technical failure. And so you back it up with OTPs. What an OTP proves is I happen to have the phone of the person this card belongs to. No proof that it's mine, but at least a stolen phone will be reported, so you have some level of hope that it's not fake, it's not invalid authentication. That is still not the same as me giving you permission to do something. Just because I prove to you who I am is not me signing some blank paper saying now do what you want in my name.
Sure.
And that's authorization. What has happened with that's consent. So it's me authorizing you to do something in my name. It's not just consent. It's consent is when you ask me and I say yes or no. But there's a difference from me saying yes or no to me saying I want you to do something in my name. Okay? In which case there's also a request. So authorization, mixes up both of these aspects.
Sure. So what happened with Airtel?
Airtel is that there was no authorization. There was only authentication. And this is the mistake that eKYC, which is the API that UIDAI provides, is an authentication API. It is not an authorization API. There is no evidence anywhere that I gave you permission to open a bank account. Now you can say you showed it to me on a screen and I accepted. But where is the paper trail for that? On paper, if I put my signature on some paper, and hopefully it was not a blank sheet of paper, but it had something printed on it, that is valid in a court of law.
Yeah.
That I signed it, therefore it's mine. It's my problem if I did not feel like signing it.
Correct.
The eKYC mechanism does not provide any kind of paper trail to prove that this happened. Now, in the case of something like Airtel, where it is so massive and so many lakhs of people reported it, you cannot draw any other conclusion but that it must have been fraud. But what if it was just one contract between two parties who are now having a fight over it and saying that, hey, I did not do this. Yeah. UIDAI, as it happens, has designed something else called e-sign, in which your signature is attached to a document, and that is proof that you accepted the document. Yeah. It is not yet informed consent, but at least it is consent. But Airtel did not use e-sign. And in fact, nobody in the other ecosystem uses e-sign today, which is a failure. That the tech people inside UIDAI decided that they knew what the solution was, they were going to build a solution. The policy people did not bother to use the solution. And so there's nobody but UIDAI to blame again.
But what role would a banking organization such as NPCI should have played in this? So when you
NPCI has an entirely different problem on their hands. So
it's National Payments Corporation of India for the people.
So NPCI runs the Aadhaar mapper, which is how an Aadhaar number is connected to a bank account. As it turns out, they don't connect to a bank account, they only connect to the bank. And the bank then knows which account to transfer the money into. And the way NPCI operates their Aadhaar mapper is on a good faith basis. Any member bank can claim to hold an account for a user. And NPCI says, sure, if you think this person's Aadhaar number belongs to you, we'll send all the money to you. They don't verify. They depend on the bank acting in good faith. Now, a payment system acting in good faith is a terrible design. Yeah. You'd never do payment systems in good faith. You always assume there's a paper trail proving evidence that you're sending money to the right place. So they made that design mistake over there, that they did not have any mechanism by which to obtain the user's consent, so they just did away with it and said no consent required, trust the bank. And Airtel had fun with the trust.
Yeah. And so UIDAI has no way of prodding or enforcing or making sure NPCI does its job, or vice versa as well.
They have the authority.
They have the authority to do
Yes,
so.
by the law, they most certainly do.
Yeah.
What they don't have, apparently, is the moral authority to make the ecosystem follow their orders. And part of it has to do with the way UIDAI responds.
Correct.
That UIDAI acts like a rogue entity that bullies everyone, does not listen to feedback, has no option available whatsoever for a researcher to inform them that there is a problem. From my understanding of people who even have to work with them, it is still a one-way communication, even when UIDAI depends on somebody to promote Aadhaar for them.
Yeah.
And that's just no way to run an organization. It's no surprise that everything's falling apart for them.
Correct. So coming to our third development, of course, which was the Tribune story, which we've gone into a little bit. But one aspect of it I want to address is the role of enrollment operators.
Yes.
So now the UIDAI, in its mission to sign up as many Indians as possible, turned to private operators.
Yes.
And there was a business model for them. They paid them 40, 50 rupees per enrollment.
Yeah.
And now it seems this, looking at the number of operators that have been blacklisted, the number of anecdotal reports that have come out of fraud, bribery, and corruption at that level, was it a mistake?
I think the mistake was in not knowing what they were getting into. Well, obviously, anytime you hire someone off the street and say, here is the most minimum verification I can do on you, there is no organization affiliation, and you're in control, don't give them too much power. Okay? And they've made a series of mistakes over the years, some of which they've fixed, but fixed after damage was caused. To start with, enrollment agencies used to sell data back in the 2009-2010 initial pilot phase, when the first few enrollment operators were also high trust operators, in that they were the ones proving that the system worked. And there have been multiple reports of the fact that those enrollment operators were in fact selling the data that they were using for enrollment, everything from paper forms to whatever else.
Selling it to whom?
Selling it to on the black market. So they would sell the paper forms that used to be used. They don't use paper forms anymore as a result of this. They used to sell copies of the local database, as a result of which the database has been encrypted since then. So UIDAI has continuously made mistakes in the quality of their software and in their trust in their partners, realized that they could not trust their partners, and tighten the controls. And this has been a non-stop process, and it's always happened after data theft.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that they have done is also enrollment operators are affiliated to a registrar, which is the agency that's responsible.
Correct.
They have made agreements with registrars to give away copies of the data. This has been a very well documented process. It's called they built what was called the state resident data hubs, where every state could have an official registrar who would then build a database of citizens in their states. It has led to disputes between states. In the example, for instance, of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, where when the states split, there was a dispute about who owns the database, and it's an ongoing dispute. And there's even accusation of spying happening between these two states. Obviously, we don't know how that's happening until we see some evidence at some point.
We'll come to SRDH in a bit. But so, with what the Tribune story essentially showed was that some enrollment operators, and we still don't know who's the real person behind it. That's the investigation is still going on. But essentially, some enrollment operators who were looking to make money decided to sell access to a tool that they only had access to, and decided to sell out administrative.
It wasn't their tool. I think it was a tool for grievance officers.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so, is this, what could they have done? Now I know. So now ET had a report earlier this week stating that all 5,000 people who had access to that facility, now that permission has been revoked, and if they want to use the grievance redressal facility, they need biometric authentication. But the UIDAI's defense here, so in fact in that report, there's an anonymous UIDAI official who sort of very sullenly states that, security is better now, but it's going to be an inconvenience for the people who are missing this. So, and this is a defense that they mount again and again, that already we know there are huge implementation problems with Aadhaar, and people are being inconvenienced. So should they be inconvenienced more? In order to ensure a higher level of security?
I think we need to define inconvenience. So if you go back to the design of Aadhaar, it was meant to be a top-level bureaucrat monitoring everybody below them, all the way down to the bottom of the food chain. And so if you think of what's happening over here, they trusted people at a lower level to have access to a grievance redressal portal, and they discovered the trust was misplaced, and so now they've revoked the trust. And this is a blow for them, because now there's nobody below them they can trust. Okay? And so it's an inconvenience to state level bureaucrat who essentially built a system that said, I don't trust anyone, discovered that you can't run anything like this without trusting anyone, trusted some people, but trusted some people in a system that was designed for mistrust, discovered, well, you can't trust them anyway, and now is inconvenienced. The operator who's had to do this, has to put in a thumbprint, but come on, are you saying that login and password is an inconvenience for people and therefore you should not have a login and password to get onto the website? And something that is this critical, sure, yes, you need to put in things. I mean, you should have had a two-factor authentication. They didn't have one. Biometrics are not two-factor. They're not even one-factor. They're private information. They're not secrets. Plus the fact that you can't do biometric authentication on a website because there's no protocol for a web browser to take biometric authentication. You need to build a native app. Now, are they going to replace the grievance redressal website with an app and do this as something they built overnight after Tribune leak? Not a chance. So they most certainly are not even implementing that biometric authentication. They're just saying things to keep the public happy.
Right. That too through anonymously sourced news reports. That's how it's been going. So Kiran, you know some of the people at UIDAI, people who are working there and people who have worked there in the past. Do you think their competency should be called into question?
Some of them, not all of them.
Okay.
Part of what happens, whether you have competent or incompetent people, is the organization structure that you put them in. And if you put them in a structure where they do not have authority to do things, then they're going to quit in frustration. Or they're just going to resign to the inconvenience and not do the best work that they can. And everything I've seen suggests that they had some competent people, no doubt about that, but they also put them in a structure that just would not allow them to do the right thing.
Right.
And it's no surprise what came out at the end of it.
Right. So, but are you a proponent of, so online there's a sizable section of people online who say that the only solution now is to destroy the Aadhaar?
No, I disagree with them. And there are pragmatic reasons to disagree, and there are philosophical reasons to disagree.
But what should be done now?
Well, so let's look at destroy. One of the things that happens with infrastructure is that you can't simply destroy infrastructure, especially one that is so widespread and widely controlled. It's like saying that you don't like the highway system, so you're going to destroy it. That's great, but how are you going to do that? How are you going to go to every single part of your highway system and destroy it and say, are you going to bomb the roads, take it down? So if you try to dismantle infrastructure, and we've seen this happen in other societies, you look at Russia, the communist structure fell apart. They were no longer the communist empire that they had originally started off as being, but that what do you do with the institutions you have built under that communist structure? They don't disappear. What they do instead is become controlled by a new class who now are the oligarchs. And that's exactly what's going to happen here, that you say destroy Aadhaar, and even if you manage to pass a court order to say turn this thing off, what's going to happen is that every piece of this vast empire that UID has built is now going to go underground, controlled by someone else. And it's just going to make it much worse. So that option is just off the table. What you've got instead is that if you're going to dismantle it, how do you dismantle it in a way that does not cause damage? And one of the ways to approach this is to say that every other ID that you had was something you controlled, that whether it's a driving license or a PAN card or a passport, it was your property. And you could use this anywhere until an authority decided to revoke it under whatever sections were applicable under the law. And those have been contested. There's a long history of contesting the validity of ID and the ownership of ID and so on. So the legal systems are well established, the institutional understanding is well established, those are already acceptable everywhere. Keep using them. Do not destroy them. Try, for instance, in their order demanding eKYC, or at least not try, but DOT. When DOT made an order demanding eKYC for mobile operators, Mr. R.S. Sharma made a public statement saying that we have told mobile operators, please throw away your existing ID proof after you do eKYC. Now this is terrible. Mobile companies, for several classes of customers, all of their postpaid customers and high-risk prepaid customers have done physical address verification by themselves. So the address that they have in their database is a billing address. It's where they send a bill, it's where they go to collect money in case the bill is not paid. So they know for a fact that the address is valid. The address on an Aadhaar card is unverified. You just uploaded some document, somebody sitting behind a computer decided to accept your document, nobody came to your door to visit you. If you replace a verified address with an unverified address, you're reducing the quality of your compliance, not increasing it. Okay? And this is true anywhere Aadhaar is used, that adding Aadhaar is fine if you're only adding it. using only Aadhaar and removing what you had before is reducing the quality of your system. So if you want to dismantle Aadhaar, start with this and say nothing that you currently have should be invalid. For those who find Aadhaar convenient, sure, go ahead, keep using it.
Sure.
Yeah. But do not force it on people who don't want it, who don't trust it, and do not take away anything else that works.
Correct. Even if we wanted to shut down the central database now, which is not possible,
Yeah.
there is what we call state resident data hubs.
Yes.
And I strongly feel, and there's a number of people express this concern. This is the next sort of controversy.
Yes.
In the making. Could
Yes.
you, for viewers who have never heard of SRDH before,
Yeah.
Describe it to them?
So this is something that came out of the battle between the National Public Register and Aadhaar. UIDAI and NPR were the two big identity projects that were conceived by different branches of the government, the Home Ministry versus the Planning Commission. And they built up in parallel. They built up with ideas about which one was supposed to do which part. UIDAI was supposed to originally only issue numbers. NPR was supposed to do the enrollments. And eventually it got to the point where they merged because they became competing projects. Now, but as a result of their history running in parallel, there have been agreements between the two parties in various states, which have resulted in what's now called the state resident data hubs, where every state would be an enrolling agency under the NPR and would then enroll into the UIDAI, but also keep a copy of the data themselves.
Right.
Okay. Now, these things are not covered under the Aadhaar Act.
Do they contain biometrics?
Yes.
Okay.
Several states contain biometrics. Tamil Nadu has even a law that mentions biometrics, a government order, sorry, not a law. There's a government order that mentions access to biometrics from SRDH. Karnataka does, as far as I know. Andhra Pradesh for sure does. Gujarat does. Rajasthan does. And there are about 11 or 13 of these states which have SRDHs. Not all of them have biometrics, some do. They're collected at the time of enrollment into Aadhaar. So they have them. There is nothing in the Aadhaar Act that governs an SRDH. The term is not mentioned even once. It's not in the regulations. Some states have their own Aadhaar Acts, but those will not override the central Aadhaar Act. And some states have nothing at all. So they're just operating on the basis of government orders.
Right.
So this is an entirely unregulated area of the Aadhaar ecosystem that will blow up if it's not examined and controlled.
But the UIDAI has no say in what government officials get to access it. So how many states have come up with legislation that do govern their own SRDH?
I'm aware of only one, I think Rajasthan, but there may be, AP is most likely to have one. I'm not aware of it because I've not been reading the law. So I think we should find someone who's followed up on the law regarding these things.
Right. So in your assessment, UIDAI needs to rein in its ecosystem.
Yes.
So today they announced, we already discussed virtual IDs.
Yes.
Their next security buffer, as it were, is unique ID tokens. So the idea is that
I think that's part of virtual IDs.
Correct. It's a
subset. It's a second piece of the same announcement.
Correct. Right. Yeah. And I mean, so for some operators, so now that trust, as you put it, has now sort of been taken back, this is a better way to reintroduce trust on.
It's a good step. You should commend the organization for the fact that they actually did this, despite everything that's falling apart for them.
It sort of renegotiates the terms and conditions between UIDAI and its ecosystem. Yeah. So you're hopeful?
I'm hopeful, but it's just not enough. It's like one step out of 100.
Oh, okay.
It's a long way to go to make this system trustworthy. This is what they should have done on day one.
Right.
And they're doing it now after everything's fallen apart. It's going to get much worse before they do the next step, which is, they need to eliminate paper cards. They need to stop having Aadhaar numbers at all and ensure that everything is virtualized. There is no Aadhaar number that anybody can access anywhere.
Right. Okay, great. So thanks. I think this brings us to the end of our discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for having me.
Kiran. Yeah, and please do keep an eye out for The Wire for our future news and analysis on this issue. Thanks.